Ben, welcome to today's news, and you're hot on the money today. You're hot on the money today with a look at Lawfare, which is the system that's being used against us.
Absolutely. Hello, Brian. Hi, Diane. Hi, everyone at home. Great to be here. And as Brian said, the best way to understand what's happening around us is to think about the fact that you're being attacked by your government. And one of the major vectors of attack is the legal system. There's a word for it. It's lawfare. And we define that as the use of legal systems and principles to achieve strategic military or political objectives. The strategic objective in this case is the destruction of the nation and the imposition of global systems of governance. That's what Brian's been talking about. It's what we talk about on a regular basis on the UK column. Where does that manifest? Well, let's go right to the top of the legal system. So the Attorney General, Richard Lord Hermer, as I like to call him, and I'm sure he likes to call himself. He's been in position since last summer, July 5th. He was appointed directly by Keir Starmer, who he used to work with, actually, as I'll get onto in a minute. Before that, he was head of chambers at Matrix Chambers, which was originally established by Cherie Blair. So this guy is completely ensconced at the top level of the New Labour establishment. Before that, he was a barrister at Doughty Street Chambers, working directly for Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer was essentially his mentor. And he basically spent his career making lots of money on the taxpayer through the legal aid system, defending the interests of terror suspects and various enemies of the British people, Al-Qaeda operatives, members of ISIS, that kind of thing. Lovely guy. And he's also a diehard communist, essentially. So he was the editor of the On Guard magazine, which is the youth anti-fascist movement. Anti-fascist, of course, not fascist, although these things do become rather similar at the extremes. He is heavily involved with Searchlight magazine, importantly, the essentially communist magazine. They covered him here from his time at university, running for the executive of the National Union of Students on an anti-fascist platform. But he was also maintaining those links while he was practicing as a barrister. So there are minuted examples of him attending Searchlight's meetings. We'll provide some links. You can go and have a look at that yourself. He's also very close to Nick Lowell, the former editor of Searchlight and then the founder and still current head of Hope Not Hate, who miraculously managed to avoid being charged for incitement last year when he falsely reported acid being thrown at Muslim women during the riots in the wake of the Southport killings, despite the fact that many others were sent to prison by the regime for doing much less. They just happened to be on the other side of the argument. I wonder if Hermer had anything to do with that. I don't know. So how is this lawfare being waged beyond the examples that I've already provided? Brian mentioned the Telegraph article. This was also reported in similar fashion in the Mail. Who also said that the Attorney General, Lord Hermer, has been accused of handing himself effective veto over government policy. Well, how's he doing that? Well, through this document. So this is the Attorney General's legal risk guidance. You should go and read it. It's just one page of A4, very short but very powerful and direct document. So how does it open up? So first point, a central element of the rule of law is that everyone, including the government, is subject to the law. I'll come back to that because it's not actually true. I'll continue. As such, the government is required to comply with legal obligations arising under domestic and international law. This is affirmed in the Ministerial Code, which refers to the overarching duty of ministers to comply with the law, including international law. Right, so they've added that because the quote doesn't mention international law. The quote from the Ministerial Code just talks about the law. So Hermer has added international law and he's mentioned it twice in his opening statement. So it's quite clear what he's getting at, I think. And let's remember, this is being issued to government lawyers to guide them in their duties, coming from the top lawyer in the government. So people know exactly what's being said here as this is distributed around the various departments of state. The document continues. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. As I said, you should go and read the whole thing. But just to pull out a few more key points here. Number 6, the principal factor for legal risk is the likelihood of a legal challenge being successful. This is essentially what lawyers are being asked to advise on. Is there a risk here that we're doing something illegal? ultimately. I'll continue again from the point. Some legal issues will not or are unlikely to be tested before a court. For example, they may not be justiciable before a domestic court, which is to say, it's entirely possible that they would not be appropriate for adjudication by a domestic court. But nevertheless, for the purpose of assessing legal risk, you should assume that a challenge will be brought and consider what a court would be likely to decide, even if it wouldn't be brought before a domestic court, which would suggest that you need to think about what an international court might say about this if they were to look at that, even if that is incredibly unlikely to happen. Right. And these are the things that are injected into the decision making process inside government in order to slow things down, throw a spanner in the works. Yeah, ultimately to get the government doing what Hermer and the people that he represents, the global entities that he's promoting the interests of, want to happen. Right. Final point. 8, if you are concerned that there is no tenable legal argument, you should consult your line manager and legal director before you advise AGO, the Attorney General's Office, and LSAG, the Legal Support Advisory Group, which is an internal body to the lawyers operating in the civil service, should be talked about. They may need to be alerted at this stage. What that means is they definitely need to be alerted at this stage. Yeah. So he's issuing a very clear directive to the people working in legal positions inside the British government, that international law needs to be considered, even if this isn't an issue in domestic legislation, and you need to tell me exactly what you're doing at every point of the process. Right? I think that's abundantly clear. Yeah, he's exerting his power. That's just one example about how lawfare is being carried out, but this is happening all over the place. I'm going to come back to it in the segment a bit later on, because we're just being inundated with new legislation at the moment. But I also just wanted to flag this, which Charles mentioned last week, right? Which is the Right Honourable Sir Brian Leveson, the Investigatory Powers Commissioner, who in that position actually has the ability to allow British state operatives to break the law in the interests of protecting the law, which is why I mentioned earlier that some of the government officials don't have to actually follow legislation. That's absolutely true. And that sits underneath Brian Leveson's jurisdiction. He issued this report last week, the Independent Review of the Criminal Courts, which essentially is about denying access to jury trial, constitutional issue that Brian was mentioning earlier on. And interestingly, and I think crucially, on the front page of that, the cover, literally, it says, "When justice sleeps, justice is cancelled." And that comes from the Babylonian Talmud, one of the key theological documents of Judaism, which might give some further insight into how and why the law is being weaponized against the British people in this fashion.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, it is quite incredible when we see that on the front cover of